First, we begin in Iran, where the regime faces growing international condemnation this morning after the execution of a British-Iranian citizen. Ali Reza Akbari was sentenced in 2019 on charges of spying for the UK. Akbari was a former high-ranking official with Iran's defense ministry. Britain had warned Iran that the execution would not go unchallenged, and this morning the UK government announced sanctions on Iran's prosecutor general for his role in the execution. CBC's Dominic Velitis has more from London.
Akbari's execution was announced on Iranian state television this morning, despite, of course, those repeated calls from the UK and the United States for his release. We've also heard this morning from Iran's judiciary, which confirmed he was hanged without specifying when exactly. We do know, Chris, that his family had been asked to go to the prison where he was being held for a final visit on Wednesday, after which his wife said he'd been moved to solitary confinement. So we're working on the assumption that he was executed at some point over the last couple of days. But as I say, we don't know for sure exactly when. Now, Akbari, who once served Iran as a British-Iranian national, was arrested back in 2019 and convicted of spying for the UK, a charge he always denied. The Iranian regime obviously thought otherwise. Indeed, earlier this week, state media broadcast a video which it claimed showed him confessing to the charges. And that footage emerged just after Tehran described him as one of the most important agents of the British intelligence service in Iran. Now, all that said, Chris, on Wednesday, the BBC here broadcast an audio message purportedly from Akbari in which he claimed he'd been tortured and forced to confess on camera to crimes that he didn't commit. Chris.
And Dom, the execution comes as the Iranian regime is trying to quell ongoing nationwide protests over the death of Mahsa Amini, protests that have drawn international condemnation and escalated tensions, certainly with the West. How will this execution put more strain on Iran's relations with countries like the UK and the US?
Oh, Chris, I think it will undoubtedly put an even greater strain on Iran's relations with the UK and the US. As I say, Akbari was a British national, and ties between Iran and Britain had already deteriorated over recent months since the UK imposed sanctions on Iran's so-called morality police and other security officials for their role in the violent crackdown on those anti-government protesters you were just talking about. We have heard this morning from Britain's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, Chris, who described Akbari's execution as a callous and cowardly act carried out by a barbaric regime. The UK's Foreign Minister James Cleverly, meanwhile, said his death would not stand unchallenged. The United States as well had made repeated calls for his release, saying that his execution would be intolerable, and we are expecting more comment from Washington later today. But Chris, France this morning has also condemned Akbari's execution and has summoned Iran's charge d'affaires in Paris as a result. So several countries already speaking out, Chris. I suspect others will follow suit in the coming hours.
Dominic Velitis for us in London.